they were during the time of the second temple. I presume when the temple got destroyed, I presume a lot of that, that once he went into exile, it's probably they just fell.
Okay.
So we can see about them. So, okay, good morning. Phase, we are on 20B. In the art scroll, it's 20. Learned the top of the page. It's not awesome. 20. Thank you very much. Who was it outside the Beit Midrash? Very good. They should know. You come to the class, now you're ready to go ahead and did you did the Milat Chasadim, kindness, by bringing a coffee to somebody. One thing leads to another. Okay, we have 20B. 2B. Okay. All right. So now again, we the Mishnah started. Morning. Oh, that's great. Well, hey, thank you for. By the way, there's room over here on this side if you want maybe a little bit. They'll come around. Yeah. And remember, we have to ask the coffee up here. Okay. We're so happy that you're here. We just started yesterday. We just started the second parak of the Succah, a fascinating tractate, like all tractates are fascinating. And the Mishnah spoke about under a bed in a sukkah, where the Mishnah stated there is different opinions whether you fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah if you're sleeping under a bed in a sukkah. Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that you could actually sleep under a bed in a sukkah, and the bed does not separate the schach. Question is, you're going under a bed, you're not under the shelter. Now the question is that bed as a I think we can have that maybe after David. Yeah. James Sutton finished the Tanakh. Say finished the Tanakh, so that's after David. Okay, so thank you very much. Buddha said we used to sleep actually under the bed in the sukkah. Just it was a space issue, most probably. Adults, maybe. So the youngsters most probably were the ones that slept under the bed. The rabbis disagreed with that, but that was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and he said they were allowed to do such a thing. And why the rabbis did not say anything, were not so high off the ground, perhaps. Maybe the rabbis held if the beds are not so considered a real interruption between, it's not considered its own tent to interrupt between the but okay, we'll have to see more about why the rabbis in that time didn't say anything. But here we have in our Mishnah sleep under a bed. And the Gemara rabbis say that you can't sleep under a bed in a sukkah if the sukkah is 10 tefachim off height of 10 tefachim off that bottom of the bed is raised 10 tefachim down, so that forms a significant tent, and that will interrupt you. So that's the state. You can't go under a bed according to the rabbis. It's talking about a bed that has a certain type The bottom of the bed is raised off the ground a certain amount. Now the Gemara goes into a different, and we'll see how the Gemara is going to connect the dots. Tanan Hasa, we learned in the Mishnah, this in Tahairos, and that deals with contamination is a very big deal in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. For Kohanim, they have to be very careful, themselves contaminated with in a tent where there's a dead body. Then Hassan, Echad Chur, you have, let's say, a hole, 20B4, the Echad Chur that was hollowed out by water. Let's say you see the wall, and the wall by the riverbank went through the bottom and created a hole, and now there's a hole in the wall. So you have now that there's a hole, there's a hollow space, and in that hollow space area of a dead body, one side of this area. They have a nice picture to be able to here. I don't know if you can see the picture so well. So here's bottom, the water, because of the power of the water, it chiseled. Now that the hole at the bottom, there, right? So this water is on. If there is, and if this hole, let's say it's a tefach that it goes a certain width, this hole, let's say it's 4 inches by. So now this serves as an empty space underneath. So we've created tent. A tent has been created by this hole in the, like it's like a hole in the rock that's by the. So now we have like a cover. Now we have an empty cover with a certain now. So if there is a certain piece of a dead body on one side of this, to the other side, just like a tent. If there would be in a tent, there's a certain an olive size or whatever size of a one of it, let's say a revered dam, or maybe a certain limb of a person that contaminate. But once it meets the requirement of the amount of a is on one side of the tent, will contaminate anything that's on the corpse is on the left side of the room, but if it's the right side of becomes contaminated because it's under one roof. That's the law. So here also we say hole. Now this tent, what's unique about this tent than any other? If a person, it's a tent, person passes away in the tent, anything that's in the tent becomes with a dead body. So what's the chidush? What's the novelty here? Make this tent. This tent was naturally made by the water. The famous mashal everyone knows about Rabbi Akiva, about tshuva, to become religious. A hole in the rock. And how did they have a hole? How did the rock is so above that was dripping on the rock? A small drip, but it was bore a hole eventually in the rock. Kiva says if a rock by the water, so my heart, which is how much more so it could be penetrated by the words of Torah. Torah is like ability to penetrate. So here we have the rock, or that this hole that was created through the water. That the way they say, let's say the ground, the earth that was around the sides of the river underneath and bore this hole, or shrutzim, or let's say different types of animals bore the hole. Again, it wasn't made with the intent. The animals made this hole that created this tent. Osha, say that the ground was salty, and as a result of that, created some of the ground eroded. It was now missing part of the ground, and above it was like created like a roof over that area. So you had like a hollow space because of the saltiness that ate up some of that ground, and now you have this cover that has, and this cover has, and there's an empty space of, let's say, about 4 inches underneath. That's called a proper tent. That's a tent. Let's say you have stones. You have stones, and sometimes you have one stone on top of 2 stones, and let's say you have 2 stones that are a little bit distant from each other. Let's say I have a stone here, and then I have a stone on top. So the fact that if you look at the picture, see here they have the picture of the stones. So you have the stones with a little separation. It's not flush against each other. So I have a space, but now I have this cover. This is considered the cover on this hollow space. So this cover will act as a tent. If there would be a dead piece of a dead body inside here on the ground over here, this cover will serve as a tent. Now, it will serve to block the contamination from going above. Because the law is that if a dead body contaminates, it can go 1,000 feet high. If nothing is stopping, is creating a separation between the dead body and above, that dead body, like a cemetery, contaminates all the way up in the air. So, but if there's something if you create a tent over the cemetery, the tent, in one hand, it will pull together everything underneath the tent. This becomes one. But it also separates from above the tent. Now, if you're walking above that, it no longer. So if a person's walking on top of these stones, he will not become contaminated because there has been created a tent with a hollow space inside of a tefach. So since there's a certain space, that creates a separation, and therefore what's above it will not become contaminated. So that's by being a tent. If it will not be considered a tent, then there's nothing stopping, there's nothing containing the contamination. A tent, on the one hand, everything inside becomes contaminated, but everything outside that tent is safe because it is the sealing of the tent stops the contamination from going above. Similarly, the Mishnah has v'chein sevoshel korot. Also, you have beams. Morning, Adam. And similarly to these stones, you have beams in a way. There's a seat waiting for you right here, Adam. Front seat, box seat. And there's a beam waiting. There are beams right next to each other. And also, if there's a space between the 2 beams, just like the stones, and the top beam would serve as a cover to stop any contamination from going above. And anything underneath that beam is considered part of that tent. So if one side of the beam is a piece of the dead body, the other side of the beam is food, the food will become contaminated because it's under one tent. Now, obviously, the commentators over there and then in the tractate have to ask the question, why do we have to give so many different cases, variations of the same theme? Why do you have to give the case of the beams, the water? So one thing I will say is that the case of the beams, there's a special chidush in the case of the beams and the stones. In what way? Because you're going to look at the next opinion. So what does the Gemara say? Ma'ayil ala tumah. All these things serve as a tent on the contamination. So it serves as a tent, and therefore everything will underneath that will become, if it's underneath that shelter of this created, this covering, everything underneath will become contaminated, but everything above will be safe, above this tent. Adam, if you want to send that to the group, just a reminder. Comes Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, we're on the bottom of 24b, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol Oel She'eino Asu B'dei Adam, any tent that's not made by a human being in Ohel. It's not a tent. To be a tent, it depends if it's made by a person, and Rashi says not only made by a person, but made by a person with the intention of being a tent. If it's not made by a person, who made it? The weasel made this tent. The weasel bored a hole in the riverbank in the edge of on the side of the river and made the tent. Or the water made a hole in the ground and created a tent. Or the salt eroded the ground and made it a tent. All those things that were not made by a man are not a tent. And therefore it will not contain the contamination, and it will not bring contamination to everything that's on the other side of that, under that same roof. It's not a tent. The Gemara will explain what is source for it. What do you mean, Rabbi? It is a cover. It's a cover. What do you mean it's not a tent? It is a cover. We saw the picture. The picture shows that there's some sort of covering above. There's a space underneath, and the covering. See, this is called the tent, right? This whole thing, we have space underneath. We're under one roof. Technically, this room is like a big tent. If there would be chas v'shalom, a dead person on one side of the room, the whole room is under that tent. But above that, technically, will not. Let's say we should not be contaminated because the ceiling contains it. But the Gemara is saying. So Rabbi Yehuda says it depends who made the tent. It's the author of the tent, so to speak. The manufacturer of the tent is the key. If it's not made by a human being with the head of the tent, it's not a tent. So maybe that's the chidush in the case of the stones. The stones, the pile of stones or the beams, you made the tent without intention of making the tent, right? You placed it. There was separation in the stones that you placed it, and now who put the stones like this? The animal? No. Who put the beams together? You did it. But the end of the day is you did not do it with the intention of a tent. So therefore, that's not called a tent. Even that case. Okay. And then the chidush is in the Rabbanan that even a tent that was made, that no human being was involved in at all. You were not involved in any fashion. The water made the tent. The water bored a hole in the riverbank and made the tent. It's also called a tent. So we have two different ends of the spectrum, whether what's called a tent or what's not called a tent. So now comes the Gemara and says, my time is Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason Rabbi Yehuda? Now, he would seem to be the more the chidush, right? Why do you say it's not a tent? It's a tent. It's a cover. It has space underneath. It's a tent. What makes this different? The Torah says, Adam ki yamut b'ohel, a person who dies in a tent. Where do you see what's the difference between this tent and that tent? So he says there's a difference. Why? Yalif, now we are on 21a. Mabruk, Mazel Tov. 21a. 21a1. Yalif, by the way, I just want to share an idea, just a little idea. A person passes away, we say it contaminates. It's the highest level of contamination. Person comes in contact with that dead body or in the same roof, that dead body, they're tummy for 7 days, right? And they have to sprinkle the ashes of the paraduma on the person. Today we don't have the ashes of the paraduma, so we didn't get purified from that contamination, but we don't have ramifications of it. We're not going into the Beit HaMikdash today. We're not eating truma today. We're not dealing with things that require certain level of purity. So we're fine. It doesn't have any. The only thing is a Kohen can't make himself contaminated. So today a Kohen can't go into a room with a dead body. Can't go to a funeral. But why did the Torah give this level of contamination for a dead body? A dead body we have to respect, we have to take care of. We don't do autopsies on dead bodies. We don't cut the dead body. We respect the dead body. I was thinking that death represents the cessation of productivity. A person cannot be productive anymore. That contaminates. Not being productive, the fact of not being productive, not having the ability to be productive, that's a contaminating thing. The idea of life is the idea of being a person in this world to be productive, to produce. That's the tragedy when a person, we just had last week's parasha, Egla Rufa, when a person was murdered, we don't know who killed the person. And there's a whole procession of what we do to atone for it. And the tragedy, and we take we take the Egla Rufa, the calf, we bring it to a place that never was planted, never worked a day that part of that ground, and you chop off the head of the calf in that spot, and you're never allowed to plant or plow or work that spot ever to atone for this person who was not able to bear fruit and be productive and produce mitzvot. Now we take it to a spot that's never able to be productive, and that was never productive, and you're never allowed to be productive in that spot. To remember the tragedy of this person's life who's no longer able to be productive. That's the great tragedy. He's not, when he's alive, he can be productive, he can do great things. He can do good deeds, he can do masim tovim. So not being able to do that anymore, he could have been the biggest tzaddik in the world who got murdered. But now the lack of productivity is the tragedy, besides the death of the person. So maybe that's perhaps an idea connected with contamination of a dead body. That dead body, as holy as that body is, it can be the biggest tzaddik. But now it's no more productivity. And maybe that's what we have to recognize. That's a contamination. That contaminates. That's just an original thought. Mr. Haber, what do you think about that idea? Okay, it's an original thought. Okay. Now the Gemara wants to know where is the source for Rabbi Yehuda? Now again, 21a 1. Yalif ohel mi mishkan. He learns a gezerah shaveh. The Torah, when the Torah talks about the laws of contamination, it says Adam ki yamut ba'ohel, a person who passes away in a tent. And we find by Moshe Rabbeinu, when they set up the Mishkan and they set up that big tent of the Mishkan, it says Vayifros et ha'ohel al ha-Mishkan. He spread the curtains as to be the ceiling for the Mishkan. So malahalan b'dei adam, that tent was man-made with the intent of being a tent that was made by Moshe Rabbeinu. Who created that tent? Who put up that Mishkan? And that was also miraculous how Moshe was able to put up the Mishkan, a one-man show. So here also, in order for it to be a tent, the tent has to be done by a human being. That's what he understands. Meaning, now we don't make a gzerah shaveh ourselves. We don't just say, you know what, the Torah says one word over here, the Torah says the same word somewhere else. Therefore, we're going to apply what's over there to over there on our own. Gzerah shaveh is something that you have a tradition from your rabbi, from his rabbi, from Tul Sinai, that this is the way you expand, that it's meant that the usage of the same term, the same word by both places is coming to teach us some law. So that's the understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, and the usage of the same word tent by contamination and the same word tent by Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching us, is shedding light that the tent by contamination also has to be man-made, just like the tent of Moshe Rabbeinu was man-made. He spread the tent. He made the tent. So therefore, in order for us, so when the Torah talks about the laws of tent, it has to be made by a person with the intention of making a tent. If it's not made with that intention, the intention of the person is the key to whether it has the laws of a tent. Because remember, these laws are novel. It's novel that a tent has the ability to contaminate everybody in that tent, even though you didn't touch the dead body. And it's novel, and the idea that the tent will serve as a interruption and to stop the contamination to go from above it. It stops at the ceiling. That's a novelty that you say a tent has that ability. It has that power, but it has to be at the tent that the Torah is talking about. So we're gonna try to explore it, right? If it's a tent, so would we say, like Adam says, that the tent of the bed might interrupt between the tent of the sukkah? That's gonna be, we're gonna get into that. Okay, we're gonna get ready for Slichot now. Now we want to thank everybody for joining. We welcome Avi, who's joined us today, and we'll encourage more people to come. Let's fill up the whole place. 6:15. The class will be again 6:15. Oh, very good. Beautiful. Beautiful. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.